What's going on, guys? Instead of doing my normal character guides, this week I'm going to try something different as all of my resources have been going to farming for Ganyu. Energy recharge is arguably the most important stat for the support characters in your party. This is because typically, your support characters are only being used for their elemental skill and elemental burst. In an ideal team build, your support characters will each have access to their burst when the cooldown of their talent has ended, while maintaining their other critical stats. In this video, I want to talk about how energy generation works, as well as give you guys tips on how to improve energy regeneration on your characters through playstyles, team compositions, and of course artifacts and weapon stats. I've seen a few videos on this topic, and I think they dive too deep into exactly how much energy is generated for different activities, and in this video I just want to focus on what is important and practical for improving the energy recharge of your teams. I think that this video can be helpful to people that are new to the game or those that have not taken a deep dive into the topic of energy recharge, as things happen quickly in combat and are often easily missed or misunderstood. I plan to accompany this discussion with video so that you can visualize exactly what is happening by implementing these techniques into your character builds and teams. If you guys like this video and would like to see more back to basics type videos, please let me know down in the comments. Energy in this game is only required for characters to access their elemental burst once the skill is off cooldown. Energy comes in two different forms, which are elemental particles and elemental orbs. These are essentially the same. Elemental orbs just have a higher energy amount and only drop from more elite enemies. These particles and orbs can be element specific or non-elemental. Elemental particles will always generate more energy for the characters with the matching element than a non-element specific particle. Similarly, non-element specific particles will always generate more energy for a character than an elemental particle that does not correspond to that character's element. Finally, a character that is on the field when the particle is picked up will gain more energy from that particle than they would if they were off the field. These three primary mechanics are really all that you need to know in order to optimize playstyle and team comps. Knowing the exact energy generated by each type of particle or orb will not add any real value. In the first clip, we see an example of an elemental particle. In the second clip, we see an example of a non-elemental particle. In the third clip, we see an elemental orb generated after killing certain types of elite enemies. Energy particles and orbs are generated in several ways, and the amount of energy gained by your characters can differ based on a number of factors. The ways that energy is generated in this game include performing a character's elemental skill, injuring and killing enemies, normal and charged attacks, and passives from some weapons, character constellations, or passive talents, as well as artifact sets. The first two ways will generate energy for the entire team, while the third will generate energy only for the active character. The fourth way can result in energy for either the active character or the team, depending on the item being discussed. Let's talk about each of the ways energy is generated in a little more detail. When performing a character's elemental skill, a certain amount of elemental particles will be generated. These particles are always element specific and corresponding to the element of that character. Some characters will generate a random number of particles each time they perform their skill, while others will generate the same number every time. Because of the way support characters work in this game, characters can also generate a different number of particles based on whether the skill is held or pressed. As we can see in the example clips, Jean will generate between 2 and 3 particles when performing her skill, while Ningguang will generate between 3 and 4 particles. Everything else in this game is RNG, why not make energy generation too? On the other hand, Diona will generate 2 particles if her shield skill is pressed, or 5 if it is held. Beidou will generate between 2 and 4 particles based on the number of hits her elemental skill Tide Caller takes, and Fischl will generate particles every time Oz hits an opponent. It is important to note that these particles are only generated when your character's elemental skill comes into contact with an enemy, so simply spamming your skill will not generate any energy. It is therefore best to always perform an elemental skill near an enemy to be sure to collect energy particles from performing the skill. I often make this mistake with Diona, as I want to quickly pop her shield at a safe distance from enemies to avoid any damage before switching to one of my damage focused carries. In the example of Fischl, her elemental skill allows Oz to be repositioned throughout the duration of the skill, therefore if enemies are killed or move away, Oz should be moved for optimized energy generation. The second way energy is generated is through injuring and killing enemies. Enemies without an inherent elemental debuff will always generate non-element specific particles or orbs, while enemies like slimes that have an inherent elemental debuff will generate particles of the corresponding element. These are generated at different HP thresholds and upon being killed. This varies between enemies and isn't worth learning, but it is important to note. You can potentially use this to your advantage if you're close to getting your character's ult and can easily kill an enemy nearby. Energy generation will always be higher when you're killing off large mobs of enemies than when you're fighting a single enemy. You can see in this clip shown that when doing a domain on low AR difficulty, characters charge their ults multiple times over the course of a minute because of how many enemies are being killed. And this will typically not happen unless your characters are extremely overpowered for the content. The third way that energy is generated is from normal and charge attacks. The amount of energy generation through this mechanism is much smaller than the other ways, but it is still important to understand and know that it exists. Particles are not generated, and only the character performing the attack will gain energy. We see that the energy generation is very slow, but because of this energy generation mechanism, energy recharge becomes a much less important stat for the main DPS as they are most often the character on the field and are performing many normal and charge attacks. The fourth way that energy is generated involves passives from weapons, character constellations, and artifact sets. All of the Favonius weapons have a passive that results in a percentage chance of a crit hit giving energy to the active character. We can see this demonstrated as Diona hits an enemy's weak spot with the Favonius Warbow. The passive on these weapons are really only useful if the character using the weapon has a decent crit rate, or if they are a bow user and you use them for charge shots, as weak spot hits result in an automatic crit. The sacrificial weapons all provide a passive which gives a percentage chance of an elemental skill ending its own cooldown. Although this does not generate any energy on its own, the additional elemental skill will not only allow you to do more damage, but to also generate additional energy. This weapon is most useful on characters whose elemental skill is performed in a single burst and does significant damage. For example, Sucrose's E ability is a single quick burst of animo damage, and the Sacrificial Fragments is her best in-slot weapon. Because Sucrose can suffer from energy issues due to her high burst energy cost, this weapon helps immensely. The sacrificial weapons are less useful for a character like Fischl, who can keep Oz on the field with her elemental skill and burst, and the initial burst of damage isn't significantly higher than the damage Oz does over time. Some character constellations or passives, such as Chongyun's 4th constellation or Jean's 2nd passive talent, will regenerate energy when an action is performed. Additionally, artifact sets such as the Exile 4-piece will regenerate energy for other party members when the equipper uses an elemental burst. Now that we understand what energy is and how it is generated, how do we optimize playstyle to take advantage of this? The first topic I want to focus on is how to switch characters on and off the field in order to increase the energy of the characters you want to have their burst most quickly. I've been confused on this topic for some time and have seen mixed information on videos and forums. We know that the characters that are on the field receive more energy than characters that are off the field. Through the testing performed, I can definitively say that it does not matter which character performs their skill, it matters which character collects the energy particles that are generated. In the first test, we use Jean to cast her elemental skill, and Jean stays on the field to collect all of the energy particles. We monitor Jean's energy and Diona's energy over the course of using each skill. We see that it takes Jean a total of 6 elemental skills to gain her burst. In the second test, we use Jean to cast her elemental skill and switch to Diona to collect all the energy particles. In this case, it takes 11 total elemental skills to gain her burst. It should be noted that these two tests are not perfect because an elemental orb is generated by the Ruin Guard when he reaches an HP threshold in each of the tests. The character on the field is going to gain more energy from this elemental orb, but it does happen once in both tests. After 6 elemental skills, we can see that Diona does have more energy than when she was never on the field. These results are slightly obscured by the fact that an elemental orb was generated before the 6th elemental skill was cast during the first test only. In this way, if you want to charge a character's ult, make sure that that character picks up the particles that are generated. I have made the mistake of switching from Diona immediately after activating her shield as she is not on my team to do damage, but this results in a huge increase in time before her burst is available. The second topic I want to discuss is ensuring that you're using your character's skills and bursts on cooldown. If you're not continuously using all of your team's elemental skills, the rate you are generating energy for the whole team dramatically decreases, as this is the major source of energy generation. Similarly, if you charge your character's burst but do not use it, all of the energy you're gaining through combat is lost. Obviously, there are exceptions where you want to save your burst for particular content, but in general, you should be rotating your team's skills and bursts to optimize energy recharge. Now let's briefly touch on team comps. Again, there are a couple of things to think about when putting teams together. First, we know that characters who have the matching element to an elemental particle gain more energy than characters with a different element. This means that team members that share the same element will generate energy faster and be able to perform their burst more frequently. In this test, we remove all energy recharge stats from Fischl and Klee and monitor their energy as Beidou repeatedly performs her elemental skill. Both of these characters have an elemental burst with an energy cost of 60. We can see that the rate that Fischl gains her elemental burst is about twice as fast as Klee because she shares the same element as Beidou. This is one of the cases for running a support character on your team with the matching element to your main DPS, for example. You'll likely want your main DPS's burst available upon cooldown, or you may have a support character on your team, such as a healer like Jean or all-around support like Bennett, whose burst you want up as much as possible. Running two team members with the same element will greatly help to decrease the amount of time between the cooldown ending and their burst being available. This is typically recommended in general because of the additional elemental resonances that can be gained, such as a 25% increase in attack by running two pyro characters on the same team. Second, you should consider the elemental skill and burst cooldown times of your team members. If your support units all have extremely long elemental skill cooldown, like Xingqiu's 20-second cooldown or Sucrose's 15-second cooldown, your energy generation will suffer. Although these characters' skills will on average generate more energy particles than someone like Jean who has a 6-second cooldown, it is still not equal to Jean's total energy generation. Similarly, if all of your party members' bursts have an energy cost of 80, you're going to be doing less damage overall and gain less generic particles from killing enemies. Therefore, it is optimal to stack your team with a mix of characters that complement each other. Finally, the game has a built-in mechanic for increasing the amount of energy regenerated from a given number of particles collected. This is the energy recharge stat that is gained from the secondary stat on many weapons we already discussed, or others like the Skyward Pride, which do not also have a passive that increases energy recharge. This is also gained from artifact main stats, substats, and set bonuses. Energy recharge can be a main stat on the Sans artifact, or a substat on any other artifact slots. In addition, energy recharge can be gained from artifact set bonuses, including the 2-piece and 4-piece Exile and Scholar sets, or indirectly through the 4-piece Gambler set, which can remove elemental skill cooldowns. The higher the energy recharge stat is, the faster you'll gain back your ult for a given amount of energy collected. Some characters need this additional energy recharge stat to be effective and access their ult more frequently. In these cases, it is worth eliminating some of the benefit that an HP % main stat will give to a healer or an attack % main stat will give to a sub DPS. However, at some point there will be diminishing returns on this stat. Somewhere between 150% and 200% energy recharge is typically optimal for support units, but the exact amount will depend on your team composition and playstyle, as well as how important it is that you access that character's ult on cooldown. Energy recharge can be too high, in which case you would always have enough energy to perform that character's burst, but the burst is not off cooldown. So this exact number may require trial and error for your team. That's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys found this video helpful and informative. If you did, consider subscribing down below. I put out a Genshin Impact video just like this one every single week. If you guys are interested in more videos on game mechanics like this one, let me know down in the comments. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.